It's time for AggroChat, the official podcast of the Tales of the Aggronaut blog and stalwart gaming community, where we talk about stuff and things, and the stuff about the things, and sometimes gaming. I'm Belghast, and let's start the show. Hey folks, it's that time again. Time for another episode of AggroChat. This is episode 491. Tonight I'm joined by Ammo.
Hello.
Kodra.
Hi.
Tam.
Hello.
And Thalen.
Hey there.
Guess what, folks? We're actually going to talk about Age of Sigmar.
Lies.
I mean, the funny thing is that nobody knows that this has been on the schedule for a month.
I mean, other than the fact that we talked about it last week.
Well, we weren't here to hear that.
Being on the schedule forever.
You guys went too long talking about Final Fantasy XIV.
Look, there's a lot to talk about.
Yep.
Like, it was still, like, even after editing down, it was still like an hour and a half long show, almost 2 hours. Anyway. Okay. So this is a topic I know next to nothing about. So, Tam, tell us things.
So, I guess the primer on Age of Sigmar is that it is the current fantasy Warhammer game.
Yep, it replaced Warhammer Fantasy.
And like it's kind of had a rocky, it had a very rocky start.
Yes.
Wait, so okay, hang on. One step back. Fantasy or fantasy battle? Because those are two separate systems. Okay.
It's the minis.
Yeah. Fantasy battles, the war game.
And I kind of want to throw this one out here because I've been casually playing Warhammer 40k and know about it, but I was this week's old when I found out that Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40k are completely separate universes.
Yes. It has been suggested mostly as a joke occasionally that the Warhammer that the old world did exist within the galaxy, somewhere within the Eye of Chaos. But
I mean, it's explicit in old late 80s,
sure,
90s era books.
Yes. Kind of like how the Tyranid used to be completely different.
Yeah.
It definitely feels like the historical past of Warhammer 40k.
Sure.
40k is the miserable far future. Fantasy is the miserable far past.
I mean, parts of fantasy weren't that miserable.
Yeah, well, and
there were some nice places to live in that world. Then they blew it up.
That's actually the really interesting part with Age of Sigmar. So Warhammer Fantasy Battles was the rank and flank. We made a historicals game, but put wizards in it.
Yep.
I played a lot of Warhammer Fantasy back in the day. And I don't ever intend to do it again. Put it that way. And ultimately, it collapsed under the weight of, hey, it's some late 80s game design that hasn't really been updated since.
Yeah.
And they blew everything up for what they called Age of Sigmar.
All I remember about playing Warhammer Fantasy Battle was 30 million dice that you had to roll.
Yes.
So much so that you had teeny tiny dice, so you could roll 100 of them at once.
Yeah. You rolled so many dice, and so little happened, mostly. It wasn't a good or interesting game. And it was very much the Games Workshop and Warhammer is kind of built around this conceit of humanity is under siege / corrupted by the forces of chaos.
Yep.
Mostly the 4 chaos gods. And they're really central to they're sort of really central to everything that's going on, and so they tend to be it's really easy to be oh yeah, this is set in the same place because I'm constantly hearing about these named characters.
It's the same chaos gods.
But there aren't, other than the chaos gods, other than the chaos gods and to some extent certain demons, other similarly beings out of time and space, there aren't actually characters or history shared between the two.
Yeah.
Age of Sigmar takes that all the way, and they literally had the end times in Warhammer Fantasy where the entire world was destroyed. And in theory, Age of Sigmar is a sequel to that, everything that happened there, but like it extremely doesn't matter. Really what they did was they said, hey, you know what setting is pretty cool actually? Magic. With the whole planeswalking thing and lots of different worlds and lots of different groups within those worlds, and everybody's fighting because there's lots of conflict across lots of different worlds. We want that. That's Age of Sigmar. And it took a bit to get there. The release, the initial like Age of Sigmar 1.0 release was missing things like points costs for units, any balancing mechanism for how many models you brought versus how many models your opponents brought. It was kind of like, do what makes sense to you. And so as a result, it has kind of a lingering, there's a lingering difficulty that it has there. Especially because over time, it's also been kind of like shedding the husk of old Warhammer Fantasy battles. Models that don't really fit the new Age of Sigmar lore, storyline, etc., but were included in early rules so that people making the transition had something they could, cling on to, and also just so that their model line had, some heft to it. And so as they've done various editions, they've been kind of dialing in what the game should feel like and what it should be. And they more or less figured it out at the tail end of, or like midpoint of last edition. There was a period of time where you could look at tournaments like worldwide, and you would see top 3 representation from like 18 of 21 factions or something. It was just incredibly healthy. And that's what they're sort of following on with the new edition that's just come out. Which I think we talked about briefly before about the like sort of terrible initial announcement that was like, we're gonna sunset all of these models and remove them from the line. And then actually we're not really doing that as hard as it sounded like, but we put it out there and it's a mess. But the actual rules are great. They've learned from 40K. There's a very clear like Age of Sigmar learns from 40K, learns from Age of Sigmar kind of back and forth cycle that we've been seeing. And as they become more and more different games, that continues to be a thing that they're doing, but also it helps them to get more information about how people play and the things that are working that are cool. And so the 4.0 Age of Sigmar is this like, it's this really tight rule set that they've dialed in, and then all of the things that they've been trying to get to work over the like previous 10 years, now that they have the fundamental foundation of the game that they figured out last edition, they can get all of that stuff working. And it's really, really cool. Like they introduced the idea of magic spells, like powerful magic being represented by a model on the board that goes around and does stuff. So it's like you could have a giant rolling fireball that like continues rolling around the battlefield and is like a presence on the field and not just like some dice you roll.
See, I remember that with 40K, where like if someone summoned a warp storm, like one of the psychers or something like that, then it would move around the battle as like a cardboard template.
Yep.
Affecting what was going on.
Yeah, and they've brought these back, and they've sort of dialed in what they should do and how they should operate to the point where it's really, really cool. One of the things that's sort of a big theme is it's a very melee focused game. So positioning is really important. And it's because you can't really affect the enemy's positioning. There's a lot of effects that let you bring models back. So even if you're in a losing fight, either if your like unit gets destroyed, there's a lot of ways to bring back a unit that's been destroyed. It's like, oh, you've got, a horde of goblins. It's not just the 20 goblins you got on the board, but like more are going to come out. And that leads to this but they're going to be somewhere else on the board. And that really leads to this sort of dynamic feeling thing, even though rather than just everybody runs to the middle and you fight. And the way you build lists is similarly it's got a structure to it, but it's a structure that requires you to think about how your list is constructed, but not feel limited, or it's trying to not make you feel limited in what kinds of models you can take. They got rid of the idea of battle line, which used to be the like, hey, you need to take some minimum of these crappy basic units in order to have a legal list. And if you don't want to play with those crappy units, then you really hope that your faction has some way of turning some other unit into a battle line unit, so you can bring that instead. And they're just like, look, bring whatever units you want, and we're going to make an explicit effort to make every unit worth taking on its own merits, not simply because you have to. And that's led to some really, really cool like unit rules and so forth. And the other thing that they've picked up is the last edition of 40K introduced this thing called this game type called Combat Patrol, which is fine. It is a decent, like, here's how to learn the game. It's like a slightly different set of rules for a set army list that just so happens to match what you would get in like a faction starter. And it's a good idea to have, here are the units that you can bring. They're in your starter. You buy a starter box and now you can play a game. But Combat Patrol never really felt fully baked. Age of Sigmar's added Spearhead, which is that's the play starter games. Also, it's a fully fleshed out game type in its own right. It's really fun. I played more Spearhead than I have base AOS now, and I don't actually mind that. It's a pretty you play it on a pretty small board. It's got its own set of mission objectives and rules, and units have slightly different rules to account for the fact that it's a smaller game. It's got a very like fast-paced arcade style of play. It tends to be. I've had a lot of pretty close games. It's such a good design, and I think the best, do you want to play a minis game starter box I've ever seen was the Shatterpoint one previously, and I think Spearhead does beat it out. It's not a one box purchase, but it's got this really like clean, tight rule set. The fact that you don't like, there's no list building involved, like, doesn't actually bother me, because it's like, oh, I can put something on the table and we can go, and it's quick, it's fun. It's a little more, it's like blurring the line between minis game and board game coming from the minis game side as opposed to coming from the board game side.
I was going to say, I imagine it's important to have a table full of terrain, right?
Nope.
No?
You've got a map. So there's a Spearhead kit that you can get that comes with the mat that it's like a rectangular, I forget the exact measurements, but a small rectangular mat that you play on, 4 pieces of terrain, which is all you need, and a deck of cards that is all of your missions. Okay. And that's it. Age of Sigmar is a lot less terrain heavy than other minis games. And so like you buy the Spearhead box and you can play as much Spearhead as you want. You've got everything you need. And because it's constrained, the game kind of knows what you're going to have. So you've got objectives that are like, hey, you can get bonus points if you have more models by this particular terrain piece than your opponent does. Okay.
Yeah, I feel like I've probably had every possible bad experience with minis game that you can possibly have as a player, but making things less terrain based is probably a good thing from my opinion, because sometimes you have terrain pieces that are basically like they look like they make sense, but then somebody's like, actually, this, like, because this isn't like a solid piece of plastic, like, I can draw line of sight through all of this, and like, you aren't protected from me at all.
Yeah.
Which is not how it looks on the board, but it's like, the less I have to be like going over terrain pieces, like looking for the geometric flaws in it, the better.
Yes. And that was a big part of 3.0 Age of Sigmar, was getting rid of all of these places where terrain pieces are just terrain pieces. And the way that they make terrain interesting is they have unit abilities that interact with terrain, where it's like, oh, if your unit is close to this terrain piece, it matters. And then they have, if you want to get into it, you can get like, hey, these terrain pieces have, here's a table of effects, and your terrain pieces can have specific effects.
Sure. That's totally fine. Like, as long as the rules are extremely explicit about what it does.
Yeah, and the rules are written like unit abilities.
Yeah. Great.
It's very, very clean. And it is a thing that they can mostly get away with because it is such a melee heavy game. Like terrain is not that important, is less important in a game where mostly you're going to be fighting. It's more like spice than it is. Hey, it's not like the extreme other end is like Infinity, where games of Infinity are made or broken on, do you have the right terrain set up on a table? And like 40K often has also had this problem where it's like, oh yeah, you can be shot at because this thing is a weird triangle-y shape. It's a cool looking piece of terrain, but it doesn't actually obscure you.
Yep. I believe the piece in question was like a building raised up on like a bunch of pillars, but the pillars were wrapped in chains, but the chains were like, sort of draped like they were the base of the building.
Yeah.
But in actuality, like, there are tiny holes in those chains that you can shoot through.
Yes. True line of sight is dumb.
True line of sight is dumb.
Yeah, and one of the things that sort of come out of it is the other thing that, because Age of Sigmar doesn't care that much about, the question is not do you have line of sight to an enemy, it's do you have range? Because like ranges are fairly heavily constrained comparatively. And so it continues that like it's about positioning, but as a result, it also means that you can get these like really, really incredible sculpts because they don't have to think about, can this be hidden behind a standard piece of terrain, which I think is great. It's like,
yeah, my goal would be never at like, I want terrain to almost act as like, and I don't know if this is something that minis players don't want, but I kind of want terrain to just be a field that has an effect on the ground, so I'm not necessarily worrying about the vertical dimension.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are behind cover. You are not behind cover. Kind of a binary.
Yeah. 40K is moving more towards that and it's not entirely there yet, but it's pretty close. It's getting closer. You can kind of see them. They have been the true line of sight. Yes, you can shoot at that person because you can see the tip of their weapon peeking out from behind a corner because the model is sculpted that way for like decades. And they haven't quite stepped completely out of that, but they're kind of on their way.
This is where I think my biggest complaint with Infinity is I do not understand how to move a model optimally 3 inches. Like, there is a skill involved in how you move your model 3 inches in Infinity.
Yes.
And it's not intuitive.
Yeah. It is a huge problem with a lot of minis games. That's why I really like the addition of things like Spearhead, because they're made to it feels like they actually designed a thing with the new player in mind and not the I've been playing this game since 1994 player in mind. And as a result, like, there was some point decades ago probably where I would have been like, this is a dumbed down version of this game, but like it's in play, it's really not. It's a different set of tactics because you're playing things differently. Like one of the things that happens in Spearhead is some of your units have a symbol that notes that they are recurring units. So if that unit gets destroyed,
it might come back.
It's not might, it will. It just pops back at the end of your next move, in your next movement phase. There's like a step in your movement phase that's units that were killed get to come back, and that so fundamentally changes how you might use certain units, because you're like, yeah, I don't have to roll a die for them to come back. They are coming back, and they're gonna go back and do the stuff that they do. It's been really, really cool. Like other than the frustrations that we talked about as far as like what models are going to be legitimate, the actual rules have been just super, super clean. And the games I've been playing have been fun and fast. I think that if I'm still sort of either putting it together myself or playing with people who are still getting used to it, but at the point at which I have a bit more familiarity, I'm pretty sure I could play a Spearhead game in like 45 minutes to an hour. If I were playing it the way that, a tournament practice Magic deck would be played, where it's like, yes, we are playing this game, we are taking tight, efficient turns, we're going. Like, I think that Spearhead is like a 45-minute game.
That's pretty good. I am reminded of my favorite minis experience, which is Ebentop, which is basically a guy put together a gigantic, like, 4x8 foot dungeon setup and gives everyone a basically identical set of Reaper minis.
Mm-hmm.
Like 3 grunts, 2 specialists, and 1 captain. And it's like, go through this dungeon. All of these POIs, as you move past them, will flip over and either reveal treasure, a tiny monster, a big monster, or something very threatening. See how much loot you can get, and then get out.
Yeah.
And it's like co-opetitive style, like you're trying to just get loot. I always thought that would be a fascinating, like, minis game opportunity if somebody could figure that out.
Yeah, there's a ton of really interesting stuff in the minis game space that I don't think has been adequately explored. Mostly just because the overhead is so immense.
Yeah, like, this is a event run by one guy who keeps doing it year after year at Gen Con and has put forward a lot of money to make this dungeon. I understand that.
Yeah, well, I mean, and also just like, if as a company, if you come up with a rule set, there's this interesting back and forth that I've seen where I've run into games where, okay, you need all of this stuff to play this interesting, like, co-op or co-opetitive game, but developing all of the minis to do that is rough. But like, we played Blackstone Fortress, which is a very similar kind of concept, and Cursed City is another similar kind of concept to that. It's like it's less ornate, but it's the same.
Is Blackstone the 40K one that I didn't think that I thought that was strictly cooperative, right?
It has various modes, but I think we were playing the strictly cooperative one.
Okay.
But yeah, like there's just interesting variants of that, but like mostly that's been the purview of like the Warhammer Specialist games back when that was a thing, and now there's some other organization, but it basically was like, hey, we can leverage all of the existing Warhammer minis to do these kind of smaller side games, and that I like those. I think those are also pretty fun. And granted, I do prefer the pure cooperative versus the co-opetitive kind of thing.
Yeah, I enjoy that as well. I always wonder why, like, people clearly really enjoy the, like, move X inches. I wonder if I was like, why aren't people trying to come up with like the sort of AI version of these games? And I wonder if, like, coming up with an AI for a game like this that would be reasonable, like a la ISS Vanguard or Madara or Gloomhaven, it's just too hard when you remove the like physical space of everything. When you add in the physical space, when you remove the like discrete nature of it.
Honestly, like I think it's just a function of minis games moving slower than everything else. Because the first game that I saw that did anything like that was Kingdom Death.
Mm-hmm.
And Kingdom Death was like seismic for what should have been this like weird little side project by an incredibly artiste designer. It really sent shockwaves through the mini space because it was the first time anybody's done like, hey, here's how you do AI for this. And there's a lot of people doing that kind of homebrew. Like there's absolutely, hey, you wanna play co-op 40k horde mode, like you can do that. It's just like it's you and you pick your small team and your opponent picks their small team and you're gonna fight endless waves of Tyranids or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very much in the like this is the homebrew thing. I don't think they've ever done like an official like this is a supported game mode. But yeah, I agree. It'd be really interesting to see. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do when you're talking about like, hey, here's a board that represents a physical space, and here are like these beautiful, cool looking minis that represent, your actors in that space. Especially if it's like there's the RPG versions, like this represents you, the character, but there's also the like you are the commander representing like giving commands to these units to have them do stuff. It's probably a pretty high risk thing to be super experimental with.
See, that's where I think, I kind of am fascinated that a game like AOS, where they're gonna make all of these minis anyways, like, you can just make different game modes. That seems very low effort. Or not low effort, but like low cost of entry.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about Spearhead is Spearhead is like a Magic format. And I think that they could do more of these.
Like, this is also kind of the promise of, is it Warcrow?
It might be the new fantasy game by the Infinity folks.
Yeah, the Corvus Belli fantasy game. I thought they were like, we're going to have a, like, you can do a Gloomhaven style PvE adventure with your models, but you can also do like skirmish mode with your models.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see where that goes.
I got to play test it. It was okay. I hope they put more behind, like more stuff into it, but that was my initial reaction. It was fun for a demo.
Yeah.
But I didn't see enough there that made me think like, yes, I definitely need to get into this.
Yeah, that's sort of what I've heard. And yeah, like, that's a whole minis game company putting everything they've got behind it. I think that if anybody were going to do it, it would have to be Games Workshop, just because they have the like critical mass of minis and functional games and so on. And they are doing more experimentation with, hey, you can use these minis to play other games in this vein. Some of them are taking off, some of them are not. Some of them are finding their niches and people like them well enough and they're kind of hanging on. And I think that's good, because the more of that they get, the more you're like, okay, cool. We can start being more experimental with our game modes. Because like the difference between, hey, do you want to play Spearhead or do you want to play core AOS is functionally the same as like, hey, what do you want to play Commander or do you want to play Draft?
Sure.
Granted, I completely agree with you, and my favorite Magic alike thing that I've ever seen were WoW TCG raid decks. And nobody's ever, and like Magic hasn't done that, or did it like once, and did they ever do it?
Definitely experimented.
Yeah, I forget what it was called. It's like
was
Plane Chase or...
Nope, it was the Hero's Path. This was, at least the one I'm thinking of, was in the Journey to Nyx, and like local stores would be given a challenges deck, and you would have to play like the store owner against their challenge deck.
Oh, and they also did Arch Enemy.
They did do Arch Enemy, but Arch Enemy is a little bit less controlled. Like Arch Enemy, you're supposed to put together a deck that is designed to make your friends feel like you're their arch enemy.
Yeah.
And like you get some bonus effects. But it's not like this is the Onyxia raid deck, whereas there was like Journey to Nyx definitely had specific like you're gonna fight the Hydra now.
Yeah. And I think that that's another thing that I think would be really cool, where it's like this is a 1v many kind of GM and party vibe, as well as the like, hey, here's the AI deck for opposing enemies. Like I think you could do like, hey, this is a set of rules that, and I think you're right that non-discrete movement makes that more complicated to write if you want to be really clean about your rule set. But also, in the case of like some people playing co-op or solitaire, I don't think you need to be that tight.
It is true. And in fact, like the rule in Madara is if there are ambiguous instructions for the AI, talk amongst yourself and decide which option you would hate more and then pick that one.
Right. Because yeah, I think that would be a really, really cool addition to a lot of mini games, and I think give them a lot more life and expand the audience from people outside of like, hey, I specifically want to play a 1v1 match against somebody else, or like a 2v2 is sometimes a thing that you see, and like that's fine. It's not really my favorite way to play games, but there's enough like other hobby stuff that I like that it keeps me into minis games. But like I would love if I were playing like, oh no, I'm making my my individual force, or like we're playing a dungeon crawl or whatever.
Well, it also like I think it would be interesting if there were then like different reward mechanisms where like maybe there is an objective that like value is worth me risking a whole bunch to try and achieve it.
Yeah. Well, the way that objectives now work in both Age of Sigmar and 40K is a dramatic improvement in that direction, which I think is really cool. Like they're somewhat randomized, but you can get to like, hey, it is actually worth me making a heroic sacrifice in order to score these points, which really does. It's done a lot in 40K to kind of make the games feel more dramatic and more action packed, as opposed to I'm going to set up my forces to do the thing my forces do, shoot you off the board, and also, yes, I guess there's points.
Yep.
It's like, no. The points do in fact matter, and it is entirely possible to be completely tabled and have won. And that's a really, really interesting.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting outcome. I was reading about a tournament recent, like a 40K tournament recently, where somebody was like, where the person who came in second in the tournament had a list that was, yeah, I get tabled every game. My stuff is slain to the model every game, but I win. And it's just such an interesting approach. But anyway, new AOS, quite good, quite fun. Actually has for the first time I have seen in a minis game, there is a legitimate, do you want to play a full game? Here is a box you can just buy. You buy one box, you can play all of it.
What a concept.
Right? What a concept.
I mean, to be fair, that was what made things like Space Hulk so great, is it just a entire game in a box with all the minis you need to play it.
Yeah, you could just play.
Yep. It's like, oh, you like a faction? The other thing that you get out of it, which I think is part of the reason I like it, although it's bad for my wallet, is, hey, do you want to try a faction? You just buy a faction box and play Spearhead, because it's going to give you a reasonable taster of that faction. And if you don't like that faction, then you're out a Spearhead box. You're not out, an entire list, whatever that costs. So it's really nice and I think that the buy-in cost I think that the buy-in cost for Age of Sigmar now is about the same as like, I think it's probably about the same as Shatterpoint. I think Marvel Crisis Protocol is still dramatically less expensive. But like, you're also getting up for a quarter of the models.
Mhm.
Like, you're gonna have more. If I were to tell somebody who wanted to get into AOS, like, what do they need to buy? It would be like, okay, buy. Assuming you know somebody with a Spearhead box, the core Spearhead box that you can play them with. It would be like buy a starter box and buy the cards for your faction. And I think that's like, I mean, depending on where you buy it and what kind of local game store discounts you've got, it's somewhere between like $150 and $200. And a Shatterpoint starter box, I think, is like $180 to $200, which you can get as low as like $150. But you probably want to buy a $40 to $50 character pack to round out your starting force there. And that's for games that are like legendarily, all right, you need to drop several $100s before you can even reasonably play a game. Being able to buy in for the cost of a premium board game is great.
What is Dragonflight?
Dragonflight is a local convention in the Seattle area that has been apparently running since 1980. And me and my kid went there last weekend. And it was definitely, so we talked about Gen Con and about how like you were concerned about Gen Con because it's such a long running con. And I think Gen Con has gone through enough growth that it has mostly reconstituted itself into something that is not reflective of like its origins. This place definitely felt less reconstituted. Like there was way more of a experience of gamer funk going on.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of the big features were some very old games were getting played. A lot of like we did a couple of RPGs. They were like, it was always fun, especially doing like some goofy homebrew stuff with my kid. And then I got to play Rod, Reel, and Fist, which was a silly game, but it definitely did not feel as inviting and as welcoming as, say, a Gen Con does. And then I also got a chance to play some Starfinder 2e, and I was playing in the Starfinder Society, and I kind of knew it was going to be an awkward experience when I had signed up for the first level like adventure, and they shuffled tables around, and I suddenly found myself at a game where everyone at the table had already agreed to run the 5th level adventure.
Oh dear.
Oof.
And so,
like, I didn't sign up. That's not what I signed up for.
Yeah, and so they were like, "Oh, it's fine. Just use a pregen."
Yeah,
and
but you're doing. Isn't that Starfinder Society?
So it is the play test, so nothing is going to be persistent, basically. And that was their point. But then the very first thing that happened was the person playing the pilot was like, "Oh man, my character is so high. Will anyone confirm what he is seeing?" And I was like, "Oh no." I just like, hey, maybe don't make your characters like one personality trait that they like to do drugs or get drunk all the time.
Cool.
Yay.
Anyways, I thought Starfinder 2 was fun. It was just, again, it felt like that type of a convention. That type of convention that like I had mostly thought had gone away, and no, it hasn't.
Nope. Sadly.
I'll probably go back to like OrcaCon, because OrcaCon was not like that. I might also check out a couple of other local cons, but I don't know that I need to do Dragonflight unless my kid really wants to. because he did have a good time.
That's good.
That's what matters. We also got to play a lot of like local game designers' home games, and we picked up a game that was like self-published. This was also funny because we're kind of in like this golden age of board games. And so I forgot what games are like when somebody publishes it with all of the cheapest possible options.
Oh yeah.
It's like, oh, yeah, we've made cardboard way better for most games. Not necessarily this stuff where I can like easily like feel the different layers of it. And there is so much cardboard dust. But it's a fun game. Anyways, I do kind of want to talk about Starfinder 2, which I got to play, and I have been reading through the rules, and it reminds me that for as boring and as generic as Galarian the setting is, because it's designed to be just like literally a theme park where every nation is a specific trope. So if you want to set your setting in the backdrop of a specific trope, you can. I think Starfinder actually has a very interesting universe, mostly because it is technically the same universe as Pathfinder, but like you are literally not allowed to like have any continuity across that because there is a gap that nobody nobody remembers the time of. Like Pathfinder's setting ends, we go question mark years, and then suddenly we're in a science fiction setting, and people know that this like memory blanking event happened, but it meant some people are still alive and like remember waking up post the gap. So it's like, how does everyone react to this? Also, Starfinder is way more playable with built on the Pathfinder 2e engine. And I appreciate that.
Starfinder, I never thought we would see Starfinder 2 because I always got the impression that Starfinder was the Star Wars saga of Pathfinder 2, but which was like clearly this experimental side thing to see if some of the ideas they had worked. But I'm really excited that they do seem to have gotten it. They do seem to have made it happen, and I love that it's compatible with Pathfinder.
Yep.
Because I have been waiting to run Shadowrun for this to come out.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's just straight up functional, and I'm excited about that possibility. I'm really glad to hear that it was good.
Yeah, it's very fun.
Also, boy, I sure would like to have a system that's like has good space combat.
Yeah, they have not done any of the space combat stuff in the current playtest, and I don't know if that just means they're getting rid of space combat.
I hope not, because that was actually good space combat.
Yeah.
It was fun. Like, don't take that away from me.
Yep, I agree.
And nobody else is doing it.
Nope. Well, like, I don't... Other than the fact that it's not balanced, I didn't mind the Star Wars space combat.
Which one?
Do
you mean Saga?
The Fantasy Flight.
Oh, yeah, it's fine.
Like, it's probably better if everyone's in a fighter.
Yeah, that's sort of the problem I had with it. Was it's just like what I want is the you and your crew in the Falcon vibe.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is... You can have that, but boy, it definitely wants you to have... Like, it is more effective if you're in a wing. And that's the bummer.
It feels like you can have that, but you shouldn't.
Or maybe just make sure, like, know that your GM should know that you're going to be less effective. That's the problem is how... Yeah, it's hard to figure that out, I think.
Yeah.
Fallout London... Does this topic mean you've played some more?
So I've gotten some more time to play it, and boy, it's good. Like it's such a good mod. It is like there's a right way to engage with it, which is pick up a copy of Fallout 4 on Good Old Games, install it because then your installation is easy. Like, and then just don't worry further. But man, it's fun. I really like it's doing some really, really interesting stuff with the Fallout space, and I would not be surprised to see this if this team can find some way to get funding. I would not be surprised to see them making their own games.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's quite good, and it's just really, really fun to see their interpretation of the Fallout. Like, it's really clear that they love Fallout, and unlike other Fallout mods I've seen that are like, oh, we're going to tell a new story in the Fallout world, it doesn't feel like the game is constantly trying to prove its credentials to you. It's more about it's got a lot of the same ethos as Bethesda games generally, and the other Fallout games, where they're really this celebration of a place.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can tell that there's a lot of love for a particular part of London that is where the game is set. And it's really cool to see that. Like, they're just very, it's a very, very well thought out thing, and they're doing interesting creative stuff that isn't like, oh, this isn't Fallout canon, but it could be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the really important thing to see. And it's the complaint that you always see about, like, oh, Bethesda ruined Fallout. It's like, well, Bethesda just looked at what was there and came up with new stuff and excised some stuff that wasn't really serving it, even though it was in previous games, which is what you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of seeing that actually put into practice is cool. I also, it definitely has some very cool vibes. It makes it does the thing that I feel like a good I think of it as like tourism games. Like, if I'm playing Yakuza, it makes me want to go to Japan, and like, this makes me want to wander London. I was like, yeah, it's beat up London, but they clearly really care about this space, and it oozes every it's like every version, every place you see has got that vibe to it. And they do exactly enough custom stuff. I think that the fact that you don't have a pit boy is really slick. I would never have thought to make that not to remove that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you don't have a pit boy.
Madness.
You see pit boys, but they're like being studied by pre-war British intelligence. Like, oh, what is this thing? How do we use this thing? What do the Americans have? But it's not what everybody's using. Yeah, it's really cool. I've been really enjoying it. You can just like get Fallout on good old games, and I think that it's relatively inexpensive and is a much better way of trying to install it than jumping through Steam hoops.
Seems reasonable.
But yeah, it's really good. It's like everything that I wanted out of when I played Fallout New California and was pretty underwhelmed by it. It's everything I wanted out of that, and it's very good at not overstaying its welcome, and it knows how to be it's got a sense of humor beyond, did you get that reference? And I really like that. But yeah, I had mentioned that I was going to talk about it more when I'd had a chance to play it, and I have now had a chance to play it, and it's honestly quite a lot of fun that I enjoy.
This week, Janthir Wilds dropped in Guild Wars 2, and I am not going to talk about it much in detail because while I have made it through the story, I know very much most of the folks here haven't.
I'll get to visit there someday.
I
hate doing things out of order. It is my curse.
I'm finally done with season 1, so I'm now doing Gyal the Elf.
Yay, me too. If we can ever get enough people to stand in this circle to start the meta to unlock the part of the map that I actually need to go to right now.
So what I'm hearing is tomorrow I should help you with Galadelph.
Maybe.
Oh, so I am on a earlier part of this quest, but clearly I should help you.
I mean, do the thing you're on now, because after that it's going to send you further south and you'll be in the same boat that I am.
Yup. That zone is unlocked through a meta event.
Aha.
And you can only go so deep in as the meta event has progressed.
Yep. And there's like actual walls to keep you from going in there, in addition to horrible miasma.
I have my siege turtle. We'll be fine.
Yeah.
Thalen, I think you have your siege turtle.
I do have my siege turtle. Yeah. There's definitely a lot of stuff in the meta that wants you to have a siege turtle.
Galadelph is the reason I actually went through with getting a siege turtle. I seriously focused on getting a siege turtle at that point. Because I'm like, oh yeah, no, I absolutely need this thing here.
I feel like I don't have a siege turtle, and I feel like probably I should get one.
You will ultimately want one, but you can also, ride in the gunner's seat on my siege turtle and be helpful that way too. So
Yep.
It's fine.
I am still trying to get my first legendary. I need to see what is holding me up at this point. I think it's just money.
Probably.
I crafted my third legendary today.
I do believe I started with the worst decision I could have made.
It's a season 2 legendary.
Yes.
So that's a start.
Yes. But it's so cool.
Yeah, I feel like the legendary starter boxes are working as intended, given that I have been around for 3 of them, or 4 of them technically now, and I have crafted 3 of the 4 legendaries, and at some point we'll work on Colossus, the one I haven't finished out.
I need so many tier 6 mats.
Yep.
I used my fancy my fancy gathering tools from the deluxe edition of Janthir to buy a set of volatile glyphs, and now I am farming volatile magic to turn in trophy shipments.
That or Drizzlewood are the correct choices.
I should do some more Drizzlewood. It's been a while.
Drizzlewood is where the tier 6 mats live.
I mean, it's a great meta too. It
is fun.
I really enjoyed it the couple times I did it, but it's been a while.
I did a lot of that, and
having siege turtles available sped it up a lot.
I imagine Warclaws will as well.
I imagine so, because there was this whole thing in Drizzlewood of you're having it like building the siege weaponry out of scrap and like all this stuff. Is like, nope, turtles.
Right, you could just not do that.
Ignore all that, turtles.
Yeah, when I was doing Drizzlewood last, siege turtles existed, and it was absolutely like, okay, y'all are just going to break this town open wide for me so that I can go in. So Janthir Wilds, great area. Homesteads were great. I was frustrated a little bit about some of the unlock order because, the thing that I really wanted the most was my homestead, and you have to kind of unlock several other things before you get to that. But also, there is still the opportunity for this to be an Icebrood Saga. I don't want it to be an Icebrood Saga, but
one hopes that lessons were learned.
Right now, Janthir Wilds feels like peak Guild Wars 2 story. My favorite Guild Wars 2 story bits are Living World 3 and 4 and End of Dragons. Mm-hmm. And this feels up with all of those. So I am very interested to see where we go from here. It's not a super long main story arc. But, obviously in a number of months, we will get another drop with more stories. So
we get smaller chunks more often.
Right. It'll play out over the course of the next year, but if what we got initially is any evidence of what we're going to get afterwards, then I think it's going to be pretty great.
Hopefully by the time the next chunk drops, I will be caught up. We shall see. I mean, if I have to, I can skip Galadel for now and move on to Secrets of the Obscure. I won't be happy about it.
We can get you through Galadel. That's
to my great embarrassment. I'm also not caught up.
Where are you in the process?
I'm most of the way through Secrets of the Obscure.
Yeah, I did not finish Secrets of the Obscure. I did not like Nyos. And like at some point I'll go back and finish it, but I didn't want to frustrate myself and keep myself from doing the Homestead goodies, given that like this is a game where you can kind of do expansions as you want without any hard prerequisites. Yeah. So I just started Janthir fresh.
The new style is like, the idea is that it leans on that as opposed to still making you feel like you've got to do it in order all the time.
Yeah.
I do admit though that like I kind of miss our crew, and I keep hoping that we'll have more of a getting the band back together moment, because all the new people that we're meeting are cool, but also like I kind of miss some of the old timers.
We've got people we like.
Yeah. I have thoughts. I have distinct thoughts about the story that I will share at some point whenever we can talk about it openly.
That also reminds me. So earlier today, I actually hadn't finished up the very last bit of season 1. So I did that.
Oh yeah, that drop that came out at the very end.
Yeah, basically I had stopped right before the fight with the marionette. And so I did that, which is where the first time we meet Taimi, like chronologically.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, yeah, no, Taimi's been great from the very beginning, because she shows up, we fight the marionette, and then Logan Thackeray shows up and starts trying to throw his weight around, and she's just making fun of him, and it's great.
Yeah, I mean, Taimi has been overwhelmingly competent the entire time.
She is a little bit of she's definitely a Scarlet fangirl in season 1.
Yeah, but
which is, concerning. Concerning.
Yeah. I mean, Asurans, you can't trust them.
I mean, she still kind of is in season 2.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Slightly less so, but only slightly. But yeah, no, I like all of them. And yeah, I hope.
Luckily, she does eventually find a good role model.
She does, ultimately. And then Goric shows up to take her place as crazy Asuran that, maybe needs to learn to not be so, I don't know.
Oh, I love Goric.
But he's also gotten better. He's also learned.
Yeah, like Goric by the time like Taimi heads off he's hilarious. He just wants to be Rama's friend so badly.
Yeah, he just wants to run the best friend's detective agency. It's great. And raises bugs.
Goric really likes bugs. Goric is that kid that obsessed over dinosaurs, except for its bugs.
Except it's bugs.
Like the other thing that I thought was interesting is ANET did something different this time on the Battle Pass. And I'm going to continue calling it a Battle Pass because, I mean, that's what it essentially is. There is a quest that you can buy with the Astral Acclaim.
Oh, on Wizard Chores.
Yeah, for a spear. So you basically get like an Ascended Spear, but it's more than just an Ascended Spear. It's an Ascended Spear and an Ascended Glove and a really nice infusion.
Okay.
All from doing this one quest. Yeah. Like, it's worth.
And I'm a sucker for quest lines, so
and it was fun. It was really fun.
It, like that tips me over the edge. Yeah.
It took it probably took me about an hour total to do all the things, and that included me going back to some old zones and filling out some hearts that I hadn't filled out to unlock vendors. But also, it was fun. It was a fun little quest, and you end up getting a far better spear than I had access to any other way. Kind of wish it were doable on all your characters so they could all have the cool spear, but I mean, it makes sense. There's a neat interaction between the infusion and the spear, so that if you have the infusion equipped in, I don't know if it's just in the pair of gloves or if it's in any ascended item, but it will basically like turn the spear all molten-y, which looks really freaking cool. Yeah, it's pretty great. I've been impressed. What is Mice and Mystics?
Oh, we've talked about it on the show before. It's a board game that I picked up, and it's a very like old adventure game. Like, I have an adventure book. It's got a story in it. There's a bunch of boards that I'm going to set out, and we're going to go on an adventure together. The story is that a bunch of heroes in a castle where the king has been bewitched by an evil queen who is now trying to like get up to some shenanigans and usurp him, has turned all of us into mice, or we've been all turned into mice now. And so we're going on tiny little mice adventures, and we're fighting against her rat henchmen. It's fun. It's a great way of introducing my kid to like the concepts of like, we're going to go on an adventure and we're going to do a quest and that type of stuff. This was before he did any sort of like Dungeons and Dragons.
So kind of like Hero Quest, but with mice.
Does Hero Quest have a storybook to it?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a whole
Sure.
Yeah, it's a whole series of adventures one after the other with a dungeon layout for each adventure with you lay out the walls and the furniture and particular monsters in particular places, and yeah.
Then yes, this sounds exactly right. What I'm going to say though is this game is not well balanced.
No.
And we were playing today, and just based on like the rolls, we were about 3 rooms into a 6-room thing when we should have lost. And I'm like, this wasn't us making poor tactical decisions or anything. This was just, this game is overly tuned. And I was like going online and looking, like every single conversation about this game is like, if you are playing this game with kids, because it like purports to be a game that you can play with kids, you need to make a bunch of rule changes. Otherwise, you're just going to lose every game. Like, here's some suggestions we have.
Oof.
So we're going to continue trying it because, like, ultimately it's a good story. It's a fun story. He likes the characters. He's very attached to the archer mouse, who is an actual mouse. She's not a human turned into a mouse. We met an entire mouse village. It turns out all mice are sentient, not just us.
Aha, that's handy.
And we had to go on a rescue mission for her. And we rescued her, and it was fun. And then now she's our adventuring party. She's in our adventuring party. The game is cute, and like the combat is at least a little interesting, but like the clock that ultimately says if this reaches this point you lose is just way too aggressive. And like, other than the fact that you could like probably theoretically just go through the whole deck, like you could constantly search the room and find like the entire search deck worth of cards, I don't necessarily know that it really needs a clock pushing you forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is definitely not a thing that Hero Quest had. Like, it was basically make your way through the dungeon, find loot, beat up monsters. Hopefully don't die. But no, like, time crunch.
Yeah, so this game, it does... So one of the things is you don't... Even if you get, like, lose all your hit points, which is really easy to do, your character gets captured. And so, like, as soon as you clear a room and move on to the next room, your hero comes back and is, like, fully healed, basically. But it also progresses the like, Doom counter one more time. And the adventure we were running, effectively only had like 3 Doom tracks. So if anyone ever lost, they would move that forward 1. If at any point the enemy is rolling a dice and it lands on effectively a 1, they add a cheese token to their wheel. If they get to 6 cheese tokens, that progresses the clock by 1.
Oh my.
And they're every time I attack them, they're rolling 2 dice for defense. Every time they attack me, they're rolling 2 dice. There's 4 mobs per room, rolling 8 attack dice and probably 8 defense dice per round. Turns out they get cheese very quickly and progress the clock to the point at which you lose.
Yeah. No, I imagine so.
So it's a fun game. It is definitely the game that literally everyone's you will have fun with this game. Just house rule a whole bunch of stuff to make it easier.
Right.
So we've been exploring that, but I'm excited for where the story is going, and then I'm excited for playing other big games like this. I need to get some more of the really big box games to play with him.
Yeah.
I've been sitting on Yazaba's Bed and Breakfast that I really want to try at some point.
Yazaba's Bed and Breakfast?
It is a cozy cooperative RPG where you play as characters staying at a bed and breakfast, at a weird fantasy bed and breakfast.
I mean, sure. I would probably enjoy playing this at some point.
It looks super cute. It's got a gorgeous art style. I'm just hoping, I think that it's got app support, and I'm really hoping that the app support continues to exist by the time I can play with my kid.
Yeah.
Is this an RPG or a board game or?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
But yeah, there's a bunch of those. I suspect that I'm going to be in a similar place as you in a few years here. Just I've been grabbing up a lot of these games that are hey, these are compelling boxed long play games.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that hey, this is great family time that I will also enjoy.
Yeah, I definitely I think my luck with my son has been I got him started very early, and it's a great way to spend a lot of time with dad, and I think he really enjoys that.
Yeah. Yeah, my son has been more into board games again recently. So we played Mycelia recently, which is a deck building game with cute mushrooms. Mm-hmm. He had a lot of fun with that. And yeah, I've got a few games that as he gets older, I hope maybe he will play with me. Like Hero Quest, perhaps. And then I've also got it's like a Talisman storybook game. It's based on the old Games Workshop Talisman game, which I love Talisman so much. It's incredibly unbalanced and, very, very of its time in many ways, but it's also just a hell of a lot of fun. And this is like a based on that, but with story arcs and things. So, and aimed a little younger than Hero Quest, it seems. So
nice.
We'll see what he thinks of that.
Have you played the new Hero Quest?
It's fine, I think.
I mean, it mostly seemed like it certainly looked like the original Hero Quest, just with more expensive pieces. But I don't know. I did consider getting it on the Kickstarter, but ended up not.
Yeah, same. I've played it, but I don't have a strong memory of it, which may or may not say something by itself.
I was about to say, I know that it got remade a couple of years ago, so I did not know how well it was done.
Based on what I saw from the Kickstarter, it looked like basically the same game, just with, updated, nicer pieces.
Okay.
And I mean, Hero Quest is a fun game. It's very much it is a D&D board game. That is what it is.
See, I have tried some of these older games, and because I know people talk extremely fondly about, for example, Talisman, and I found Talisman kind of terrible.
It's incredibly unbalanced. And once somebody starts winning, they probably just keep winning. So, yeah, no, I get that. I completely get that.
It also did not feel like it had a ton of decision points other than dice rolling is happening.
It's true. Like, there's a little bit of, I can use my move to, one of these two spaces. This one will let me draw more cards, which could be good, could be bad. But yeah.
That's probably a show. Any other short topics anybody wants to talk about? Okay. Well, hopefully you enjoyed the show, and we will see you again next week. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
See ya.